Welcome back to the CSC Garage. In this episode, I'm going to show you how to remove and install the rear wheel of your ES5. We're also going to go over belt adjustment at that time, and it only takes a few simple tools. So let's get to it. First thing I want to do is get this mud guard out of the way. So I'm going to use a 5mm Allen to remove the 4 mounting screws. Next, I want to remove the caliper from the bracket. So I'm going to use a 12mm to remove these 2 mounting bolts from the caliper. Now, before removing the axle, I'm going to take some tension off of the belt. So back off that lock nut, and then I can turn in the adjuster. I'm going to do that on both sides the same way. And I'm using a 13mm wrench. And now I can use that 19mm socket on the axle nut and the 15 to hold the axle stationary. And you'll notice there is a lock nut that comes off with that axle nut. And then also the adjuster can slide out. So now we can slide the axle out. You notice that adjuster is coming with it on the left side as well. And that was the caliper bracket that fell down. And I'll kind of move this up, the wheel all the way up forward so that I can remove the belt, pull it to the left, and that frees up our wheel. You'll notice there is a spacer on the left side sprocket. That's the shorter spacer. The longer spacer is going to be on the brake side with the bracket as well. Now we're ready to reinstall the rear wheel, but before I do, I'm going to take a little more anti-seize. I'm going to lube up that axle, particularly where the bearings and the spacers are going to run on that axle. Keep things spinning freely, just a light coating of anti-seize. And I'm also going to apply a little bit of blue Loctite to those caliper mounting bolts. I'm going to go ahead and put that on now so they're ready. The dab will do you. And now we're going to reposition that rear wheel. Get our smaller spacer on the left, the drive side. Let me go ahead and pull that belt over it. And the larger spacer on the right side, directly on the wheel. Now on the brake side, you're going to have that spacer against the wheel, the bracket against the spacer, and then this outer edge which has the built-in spacer towards the outside of the scooter. You're also going to have a slot here that has to latch over a tab that's on the inside of the swing arm. I've got it hanging, and when I'm ready to insert the axle, it's going to lift up. This is kind of a balancing act, so just be patient with it and you'll eventually get that axle slid back in. Now I've got the axle slid back in. I'm going to first put that locking nut in there. And leave everything kind of loose so that that axle can slide back and forth when we adjust the belt. Now I'm going to slide the caliper on, making sure that the brake pads go on both sides of the disc. I'm going to use that 12mm socket. And once again, probably somewhere between 20 and 25 foot-pounds of torque. Those bolts. And now before I make that adjustment to the belt, I'm going to put the mud guard back on. You'll notice that the little zip tie clip popped out of the hole, so I can insert that back in just to keep things clean. Of course, use that 5mm Allen to attach the fasteners. And now I'll do the same thing on the left side. Tighten those fasteners down. I'm leaving them all a little loose at first, and then I'll go back with my phone. Just lets that mud guard kind of get situated. Maybe 10 or 12 foot-pounds on those small screws. And now we're ready to make our belt adjustment. Now, although the adjusters are back where the axle is, we're gonna look at the belt around this area. You got that lower belt guard. I'm just pressing the belt. There's quite a bit of play in that. We're gonna tighten that up some. And up top, you have the upper belt guard, and you can also press the belt here and actually see there's some guidelines to show how much movement there is. So you can see that's the full length of those guidelines right now. So I'm gonna use the adjusters to pull the axle back, tighten up that belt, and find the correct tension. We'll make sure we make the adjustments on both sides consistently. Now I'm going to use my 13mm wrench to start working those adjusters. I'm turning that counterclockwise to push the axle back, and that's going to put more tension on the belt. I don't want to go too far back on one side. I'll kind of go to the other side so that I'm working those back consistently so that the axle stays square within the swing arm. Still a little loose. There's quite a bit of play in that belt, so I'm going to take a little more out, continue backing that adjuster out. And then on here, there are also guidelines here, so you can match those to the other side of the swing arm so that you get that consistent pull of the axle and it stays square. And you can choose what points you want to look at. I'm going to look at this last back little nodule, and you can see it's at the second to the last line on the swing arm. So that adjuster, the back nodule of that adjuster is right here. I'm going to check the other side and make sure it's even. And it is even. I like the tension on that belt, so I'm going to then lock down my adjuster nuts. And now we're ready to tighten up the axle lock nut and the axle decorative nut. So we already have the one smaller nut mounted just hand tight on the axle to keep the axle in place. I'm going to tighten that one down first. You might need to hold the axle stationary on the other side with a 15mm wrench. I've got this in there so tight right now that the axle's not spinning. I'll put that nut somewhere around 40 foot-pounds, and then I'll put the decorative nut on top. Same thing, 35, 40 foot-pounds with that 19mm socket. And we're good. If you want to, you could check that with a torque wrench, or just check it by feel with your hand. You're not cranking down on it too tight, but it's a good 40 foot-pounds there. And we're done. Thanks for joining us once again at the CSC Garage. I've enjoyed showing you just how easy it is to remove and remount the rear wheel of your ES5, as well as adjust the belt. These things are easy to work on, so stay tuned for more tech videos, and until next time, enjoy the ride.